said, this doesn't make a lot of sense.
Going to the other side was the ultimate goal.
It was the price of being his little princess.
People disappearing started making it strange.
He wouldn't blink. He would get this terrible grin that just looked evil.
Hello, my beautiful friends, my Sippendales. Welcome to True Crime Wine Wednesday. If you're new here, hi, hello, welcome. I am Sherilyn, and I am so glad you found me. If you're not new here, welcome back. Thank you for joining me every single Wednesday or whenever I upload, because sometimes it's not always Wednesday. We also have a new series that I just posted for the first time. It's me reading your stories that you submit to me through my email, and I share them. It's something I'm just feeling so good about. Giving you a voice or giving your loved one a voice is making me feel so proud of the hard work that I've put on this channel so that there's a platform for you to share and make sure your loved one isn't forgotten and that their story is out there. So thank you so much for the support on it. It means so much to me. If you do have a story that you want to submit, you can do that at sherilynstories@gmail.com. All right, let's get started. Before we do, I want to give a huge thank you to today's sponsor, my great friends over at NordVPN. If you've been thinking about a VPN, I'm telling you, now is the time. If you don't know what a VPN is, it stands for Virtual Private Network, and that's exactly what it does. It protects your devices from hackers accessing your personal information and using it to do harm. Basically, it encrypts your data. So the way I look at that is like maybe like the Matrix, like I'm not really sure what it looks like on the back end, but that's how I envision it. So it just looks like mumble jumble. That's the techie side of the VPN, but my favorite part is having access to shows or movies or streaming services that I don't get in Canada. Fun fact, NordVPN has over 5,300 servers across 60 countries. So if you want to binge shows in streaming services that are in different countries, there's 60 to choose from. Lots of content. First one that's coming to mind for me, if you've been here for a long time, you already know what I'm going to say because summertime is coming, and that means Love Island UK is coming. If you haven't watched Love Island UK, you are missing out. It's my favorite part about having a VPN. And I'm not even gonna lie, the very first time I ever purchased a VPN was to watch Love Island. With NordVPN, you can watch across 6 different devices. So whether you use Windows, Android, iOS, Mac OS, Linux, even your Android TV supports NordVPN. It's so easy to use. You already know this. I have no concept of technology. And I know that anybody who has gotten on a Zoom call with me can attest to this. But I can work a VPN because all it takes is just one click and then you're connected. Or you can even enable auto connect, and then just whenever you turn your computer on, it just automatically does it for you. If you want to get protected and if you want to watch Love Island with me, maybe use the link in my description or go to nordvpn.com/Sherilyn. There you will receive their exclusive offer. I always mention too, they also have a 30-day money-back guarantee, so your pockets are also protected. Once again, that is nordvpn.com/Sherilyn, and thank you so much again, NordVPN, for all that you do and for sponsoring my channel. All right, riddle time. This was one of those riddles where, I mean, we already know I always get them wrong anyways, but this one I really thought, okay, when I read it, I'm like, this seems like it's gonna be easy. And it really was, but I didn't get it. But then when I read it, I was so frustrated with myself because I was like, it was really easy, Sherilyn. So don't feel bad if you don't get them. I never get them. Okay, today's riddle. Name 3 consecutive days without naming any of the 7 days of the week. You guys are gonna be like, Sherilyn, why didn't you get it? All right, let's get started. Grab your drinks, grab your snacks, grab your keyboards, grab your rags. I'm like, blah, blah, blah. So many options of things to do that I can't even talk. Grab your laundry. I can't stand laundry, but I will do laundry with you if it makes it easier for you. If you are a Dateline fanatic and you have seen every single episode like me, this case may be one that has stuck with you for years, like it has myself. It's always one that I wanted to revisit and share on the channel. This case involves a deadly cult, and I think these are so important to share because it really brings awareness to the tactics and the manipulation that these people use for everyday people who may just be in really vulnerable situations at a point in their life. That's usually how they find these followers. And it's so easy to think, I'd never fall for that. But these aren't normal, functioning, rational people who rope you in. They are skilled at gaining your trust. They pull you in when you're vulnerable, and it could be at a time where you don't even think you're vulnerable. But it just takes like one little crack in an emotion that you show or a story that you share, and they've got you. Today we are talking about the cult named Angel's Landing. It was run by a monster, in my opinion, a serial killer, cascading as a seer and 1,000-year-old angel, known to his members as Lou Castor. I'm just going to say this now. This story is tough. It deals with pretty much every single form of abuse you can think of, as well as murder. So if that is too heavy for you, I will see you in the next video. Today we are going to Wichita, Kansas in 2010. To me, Kansas sounds like what Saskatchewan would be in Canada. Lots of land you can just see for miles because it's just flat. Wichita is supposed to be as big city as it gets in Kansas, but my impression was that it's still quite tight-knit. So when a newcomer comes to town, like Lou Castro did, and he comes to town with his chosen family, like he likes to call them, and they all live on the same property, he had people's attention. I mean, the property alone stood out. It was big. There was over 10 acres. It had a really big house on it. And then on top of that, there were another 3 houses that Lou and his family built, kind of like their own commune. I mean, I'm not going to lie. That's the vibe me and my family are going for. I definitely want like all of my siblings on the same land with me, but not like this. By the time they got to Wichita, Angel's Landing was made up of 7 members. There was Lou, who was the head of the house. Patricia Hughes, she was explained as the matriarch of the house. She was like a mama to everybody. She had this nurturing, maternal, natural, motherly aura to her. She was also really fun-loving, loved to make everybody laugh, and you could always count on her to be cracking jokes. She had known Lou since they were teenagers. She and Lou met while he was an airplane mechanic working for the Army. And at the time, they were living in Texas. Also living on the property was Patricia's husband, a man named Brian Hughes. He's described as a really sweet man. When he first met Trish, he was working construction, but then he went and became a mechanic and was doing really well. He sounds like a really chill guy, just someone that's effortlessly easy to get along with. The 2 of them had a baby girl that also lived there, and then Brian had his friend Dave live there. I guess Dave was like a big teddy bear of the group. He and Brian worked together at the same construction company and they became friends. During that friendship, Dave's wife had passed away, so he started spending a lot of time over at Angel's Landing, going to barbecues. I guess this place was very social. A lot of people from the community would come and go to events that they hosted there, have barbecue. Even law enforcement would go there. I'm sure a big part of it was people wanted to get on because they were curious and figure out what was going on. With the move to Wichita, they added 3 more members to the house as well. It was a woman named Jennifer Hudson and her 2 daughters, Sarah and Emily. Jennifer is described as a very sweet mother who was very patient. It sounds like she just took in every moment of motherhood. She took pride in her appearance, but she wasn't over the top flashy or had a little air about her at all. She was a hard worker, providing for her girls as a realtor. And I think she was just one of those people who always wanted to see the good in everybody. She believed miracles happened every single day. She believed that angels walked among us to protect us. Jennifer and Lou met in 2001 when Lou hired her to be her realtor. And right from that first meeting, there was an instant connection and friendship. It affected her so much that she even wrote about meeting him and Patricia in her journal. She said when she met them, she was almost caught off guard at how trusting they were of people. She felt like they had these huge hearts and were oblivious to the fact that there could be people in the world that would take advantage of that. So she felt it was her responsibility to watch out for them, make sure that no one did take advantage of them, especially when it came to buying property. As they all become closer, Jennifer starts to feel like she had this feeling of needing to protect them for a very good reason, because Lou confesses to her that he's an angel. and he knows when people are going to die. But if he was close to you, he also had the capabilities to bring you back. So she's thinking, I'm protecting him at all costs because he's going to be protecting all of us at all costs. Now, around this time that she meets Lou and Patricia, her and her husband go through a rough patch. One of their main arguments was that Jennifer felt like, with this responsibility that she felt of being a good friend and looking out for Lou and Patricia, she should be living closer to them. At the time, I believe they were living in Missouri, and Lou and Patricia were buying this property in Wichita, so she wanted to move the family there as well. Her husband couldn't really grasp the concept because this was a new friendship. He didn't really know them that well. And he didn't just want to uproot the family and their life. Up until this point, they had what seemed to be a quite ideal marriage. Jennifer's husband was a home builder, so he would build the houses, and then with her being the realtor, she would sell them. Very cute little system they've got going on. They lived in the suburbs. They had these two beautiful daughters. Everybody was extremely close, so there wasn't any signs that there was a rift in the relationship prior. My interpretation is that I think Jennifer expressed this frustration to Patricia, being like, I would like to go, but my husband's really not on board. And Patricia tells her, you know, how dated the whole being married and tied down and not having the ability to choose who your real family is. Lou and her found each other, and they're living proof that you could have an unspoken bond with somebody and not be blood related or married. The more she sat on that, the more she was like, makes a lot of sense. And I think I want to be a part of that. Since her husband wasn't keen on the idea, Jennifer made the decision to file for divorce. The girls were around 16 and 9 years old and not happy about it at all. Understandably, they saw their mom as destroying their family, one that they also were under the impression that was really good and healthy. Nonetheless, Jennifer moved with the girls to Wichita to live with Lou in June 2001. When they got there, the girls' frustrations did not change. They were not impressed. They thought Lou was very over the top. He was a try-hard, trying to be cool to win their affection, also trying to play like tough guy, I don't really care, and I'm going to be strict. And I can just imagine what the dynamic was there. You've got a teenager and a preteen who have just had their family flipped upside down. They don't want to be there. They blame you, and you're pretending you're Mr. Cool Guy. It's gross. One way that trust was attempted to be built between the girls was that they were now privy to learn this information that Lou was an angel. At first they were like, oh, for shit's sakes, like, now what? How is our mom believing this stuff? Are we in the twilight zone right now? But as the days went on, they became a lot closer with Trish. Like I said, she had this magnetic energy, just this maternal light to her. And the girls quickly were looking at her like a second mother. And so they would say that Trish would tell them stories about, yeah, like, I've seen some of these miracles that he can, what's the word I'm looking for? I want to say miracles he can commit, but I feel like that's like a crime, which it is a crime if it's involving him. Maybe that's why it comes to mind. You know, perform. Miracles he can perform. That's the word? Okay. Trish said she saw some of this. Sometimes it was between other people that they had known. They were really sick and he healed them, or animals that were dead and then he brought them back to life. She even said one time Lou was really sick and died and brought himself back to life. With it coming from Trish, the girls slowly started to open up their minds to be receptive to this information and kind of start to believe it. And with that, it slowly led to them feeling they also needed to protect him, respect him. And it was hard to push back because he did provide for everybody and he provided very well. They had anything and everything you could dream of. I mean, every toy that was created, dirt bikes, ATVs, those types of things. They had a pool. There were 8 luxury vehicles on the land, which were really easy to keep track of because they all had personalized license plate that said Angel 1, Angel 2, Angel 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I think there were 8. The only thing that was questioned was not even the members of Angel's Landing knew what Lou did for work. He told people that he had stocks and bonds, said he had cattle and property out in Texas that he made money on. These were things that nobody ever physically saw, but in the same breath, they thought, who are we to question it? And it's not like they were keeping everything to themselves. Like I said, Lou had parties almost every single week. He also donated to the police. He donated to charity. There was like an ATV track on the property, so even kids from the community could just go and use the property. So I think there was that sense of if he had something to hide, he wouldn't be so open and flashy, or would he? That I think is definitely what his tactic was. Behind the doors of Angel's Landing, there were just grotesque things happening. After finally gaining the girls' trust, Lou took that power and privilege and robbed the girls of their innocence and individualities. When it came to Sarah, who was the 16-year-old, he would berate and degrade her. She was harder to control because she was the teenager and definitely in that phase where you don't want to listen to anybody. And so he just zeroed in on her and broke her down. Eventually, that turned into him being the one to lift her up. Initially, it kind of started with possessions, buying things, making her feel good about herself after he just ripped her apart. And then she said it turned one day into just the two of them being alone and him asking her to come and sit with him. And he says, "You're very broken. This is why you are the way you are, why you have a bad attitude. And you have to make the decision that you either live this way forever and you never have a bright future, you'll never have a family, or you let me fix you." For just reference, every action and reaction she had was just her being a teenager. And it makes me so sick that somebody would take those emotions, hold them against a young woman, and then prey on it. It's so sad because for Sarah, she didn't know that. This is the first time she's a teenager. She doesn't know that she's like all the other teenagers out there. She just thinks this is the way she's reacting to this phase in her life. Lou's solution to fixing Sarah was to sexually abuse her. Again, in her mind, she doesn't know that this isn't okay. She had the feeling that this wasn't okay. And so her question to him, naively trying to, say, "I don't want to be doing this," was, "Okay, so are we good now? Am I fixed?" And he's like, "No, you're somebody who's always broken, but I can be the one to just continually fix you." You guys know Jurassic Jail, right? Anyone new here who doesn't? Very easy concept. You know the movie Jurassic Park. We make a real Jurassic Park, and then we bring pieces of garbage like this there. You know the scene with the goat that's getting lowered into the T-Rex cage? Yeah, these effers are the goats. Have fun, bye. And Lou made sure that Sarah wouldn't tell anybody because he said, "If you tell anyone, I will kill your dad." And she was the biggest daddy's girl. Daddy's girl through and through. Whatever the definition of daddy's girl is in the dictionary, Sarah is right there. So she would never, ever want to risk losing him, and especially being the reason why something would happen to him. When it came to Emily, she was younger, so he built her trust by treating her like the princess of the house. She got anything she ever wanted. For her birthday, for example, one year she wanted horses and she got 3 horses. Like I mentioned at the beginning, these people know what they're doing and know what type of personality, what age group, what kind of person you are to be controlled, like what they need to do to control you specifically. So being 9 years old, Emily's very impressionable. She's like a little sponge to him that he can just mold into whatever he wants. Up until this point that they had been in Wichita, they just kind of seemed like, the questionable but fun ranch that people like to go to. But on June 26, 2003, the community saw them suffer their first tragedy. It's described as a very regular day for the family. Lou and Patricia were with the girls because at this point, Brian and Jennifer still had their jobs. So during the day, Lou and Patricia would do things with the kids just to keep them entertained. And on this day, they went for lunch. And then after lunch, the plan was for Lou and Sarah to go to the car dealership to get Sarah a new car. Sarah left first and Lou followed behind her. And not long after they arrive at the dealership, Sarah gets a phone call from Emily and she's hysterical on the other line. She's screaming that they need to get back to the house and that Patricia has just fallen in the pool and she can't get her out. So she hangs up, rips to the house. When she gets there, Emily is inconsolable. She says that Trisha's little daughter had fallen into the pool and she saw Trish run and slipped on the way to save her daughter, and she hit her head, and when she landed in the water, she was unconscious. Emily said she jumped in to the water to save the little girl, gets her out. By the time she gets back in to try to help Trish, she can't get her. Every attempt that she was making to flip her over or to drag her to the shallow end was unsuccessful. She called 911 for help, but by the time they got there, Patricia was dead. When the medical examiners did their report, there was no suspicious findings. It lined up exactly like an accidental drowning would. The police also get the report, and again, they take it at face value. However, the members of Angel's Landing didn't know this, but the police had already secretly had their eye on them. Since 2003, Lou had been on the radar for their narcotics department, just based on the fact that they lived on this huge property, had all of these expensive things, and then no idea what he did for work. They explain it as unexplained wealth, and usually that lines up with you doing something involved in the criminal world, whether it's drug dealing, weapons dealing, and so they had their eye on Lou, trying to figure out what he was all about. Unfortunately, just the suspicion that something shifty was going on isn't enough for them to go and raid the property or arrest anybody. And like I said, after receiving Patricia Hughes's death certificate, everything lined up with it being an accident. For the members of Angel's Landing, this was a huge loss. Like I said, Trish was the matriarch of the house. They didn't know how they were going to get on without her. And they're also really confused, but don't know how to approach it because Lou's supposed to be able to bring people back. Why isn't Patricia coming back? They just figured they needed to be really patient, and days turned into weeks, into months, into years, and she still didn't come back. So everybody banded around Brian to help him take care of him and Patricia's daughter. I guess he was in absolute agony without his wife. He didn't know how to function without her. When everyone from the house would go and check on him at night to make sure that he was doing okay, they'd find him asleep, just clutching the wedding photo of him and Patricia. And Lou started to try to console him by saying, "Death is the ultimate goal. We don't even want to bring her back here. She's too good for that. She's too good to come back to Earth. Right now, we just have to be really patient and know that our time is going to come for us to join her where she's at. Like, that's the ultimate privilege." Meanwhile, while the detectives who were already side-eyeing the property start poking around, they reach out to the FBI and ask if they have any information on Lou Castro. The FBI comes back and they say there's no record of him. Not a birth certificate, marriage certificate, nothing. So the detective's like, challenge accepted. I'm gonna figure out who you are. He does some digging of his own, and finally he finds something with Lou Castro written on it. And it was on a obituary for a woman and her daughter who had passed away a few years prior. Her name was Mona, and she had died 2 years before Trish. She had become close to Trish and Lou when they all lived in the same apartment complex. Similar to Jennifer, she had 2 kids. She was going through a divorce, and she found comfort in Lou and Trish. They all lived together. They were roommates. And then after about a year living together in 1998, Lou decided he wanted to up and leave. He wanted to move to North Dakota, and the 2 ladies wanted to follow. Mona and her daughter went with Lou. Her son decided that he wanted to stay back with his dad. And they all moved together in this small little cabin. It was the first kind of commune feel. This is when Trish and Brian met. And Mona also found love around this time. She met a man who was a realtor who also had his pilot license. When Mona's daughter Lindsay's birthday came up, Mona and her boyfriend decided it would be a really fun idea for the 3 of them to just go on a little flight together. Lindsay was really excited. She had never done something like that, and then for this to be the way they're gonna celebrate her birthday was a big deal. Unfortunately, not long after takeoff, the plane crashes and all of them passed away. I think something just worth mentioning is, remember, once upon a time, Lou was a plane mechanic. The investigation from the wreckage didn't find any signs of anything malfunctioning, but a conversation Lou had with Mona's son after the crash suggested maybe he knew something was going to happen. At the funeral, he was holding Mona's son, hugging him, saying, "Your sister was never supposed to be on the plane. You know that if your sister was still here and something happened to your mom, that I would always be there to take care of her." Unfortunately, though, there was nothing to indicate that it was anything other than an accident. So now these are 2 accidents that are just leaving things at a standstill, and unfortunately that leaves the opportunity for more tragedy. The next accident happened 3 years later in March 2006. Brian was back home visiting his family, and he was working on a vehicle in the garage. Everybody who knew him knew that he was very safety conscious, but for some reason on this day, the jack slipped and he was crushed and killed. Allegedly, prior to him going to work on the car, he did call Angel's Landing and spoke with Lou for quite a while, and before hanging up, he asked to speak to his daughter, and on this call, his daughter was emotional. They were saying goodbye and that they loved each other. The thought that everybody had was Lou had kind of been lining these things up, and did he predict something that Brian's time was coming? Now that he's gone, he can be with Trish again. In order for that to be true, we'd have to believe that he kicked that jack from under him and took his own life. And for some of us, that might seem unimaginable, especially over the phone with him being so far away. But given somebody's vulnerable state like this, also their unwavering faith and trust in somebody else who's claiming to be an angel, anything's possible. When the detective finds out another tragedy has happened to a member of Angel's Landing, they're like, what the F is going on over there? He does some digging and he finds access to life insurance beneficiary payouts. And he sees that when Patricia Hughes passed away, her policy paid out $1.24 million to the members of Angel's Landing, who we know Lou is the one who controls everything. And he sees that as the number in the account is getting smaller and smaller, that's when Brian passes away, and not surprising, Brian's insurance policy is also made out to the surviving members of Angel's Landing, aka Lou. After Brian died, the account went back up over $1 million. I actually can't imagine how frustrating it would have been for this investigator. I know that we have seen some really unsettling investigations on the channel, but we've also seen some really good, solid investigation, and this is one of them. It just goes to show how much patience you need behind the scenes, and that even when it's really easy to just explain something away and move on to the next one, if you're a really good detective with your victims at the heart and center of everything you do, you don't give up. And he didn't. He, to the amount that he was allowed to, kept his distance but kept his eye out on Lou. And one day he's just driving around, and by fluke he sees Lou drive by, and he's got this woman in his vehicle. So he follows it and he goes to this diner that Lou has lunch at, and he sits off to the side and has lunch himself. And when Lou and this woman leave, he quickly goes up to the server and asks if he can keep all the cutlery and plates and cups and bring it to the lab to see if they can pull any DNA or fingerprints, so they can run that and try to find out who he is, because again, this Lou Castro name isn't coming up. Unfortunately, the fingerprints they were able to pull were not usable. Again, just goes to show how frustrating this probably was, which I'm sure makes what happened next even more heartbreaking for him, not being able to do anything. 2 years after Brian's death, Lou goes to Sarah and Emily and tells them, I think your mom's time is coming. The girls are horrified. They're like, what do you mean? She's our mother. She can't leave us. She's our rock. Somebody else has to go. Lou says, I'm sorry, it's gotta be your mom. The girls were so upset. They went and confronted their mom and they said, Lou is saying that you've got to go. Jennifer's reaction was very motherly, just wanting to make sure that the girls were okay and calm. And she said, don't worry, I'm not going anywhere. A couple days later, on September 22nd, 2008, Jennifer was at work. Sarah and Emily both said that they were trying to call her to get a hold of her, but there was no answer. They just figure, okay, she's with a client. It's all good. We'll talk to her later. And then in the middle of the afternoon, Emily is pulled out of an exam and she's told that her mother was in a horrible car accident and there was nothing they could do, that she didn't make it. The girls are distraught. They're wondering why Lou didn't stop it, but they're not thinking that he's responsible, right? I mean, it's a car accident. Who can you blame? When the detective finds out about this car accident, I'm sure he's wanting to pull out his hair at this point. He looks through the witness statements, and every single one of them basically said the same thing. They said Jennifer's vehicle hit a fully loaded gravel truck head on, and it wasn't one of those situations where they were going up a hill and you couldn't see who was coming, or turning a bend and you couldn't see. They said this was, flat road. She veers over to where the semi is for quite a while, and it's very clear that she's in the other lane coming at this truck and doesn't attempt to get back into her lane. She just pushes on the accelerator and hits it. And go figure, when this detective looks at the accounts that he had access to, the funds from the beneficiary payout for Brian's death were dwindling, almost completely gone. And now Jennifer's died, and she's also left all of her money to Lou. So he goes back to the lab and he says, okay, I shit the bed on the last fingerprint retrieval. What do I got to do to make this work? So they're like, we just need them crisp as shit. So they go over to the Angel's Landing property, and Lou answers the door, and they say they've got some photographs of some shady people they think have been in the area, and they just want to show it to him and see if he might know who they are or have seen them, and to keep an eye out. So they've got this stack of photos with them, and they obviously want his fingerprint on the nice glossy sheets. Lou says he'll try to help. He brings them in, and the detectives put the photos on the table, and they notice that as he's looking through it, when he wants to move it, he's only using the nail part of his finger to move them around. So probably pretty awkward. They're like, okay, he knows what we're up to. So again, he has to leave with no evidence. Not long after this, Lou decides he wants to move to Tennessee. In this time, he had also recently met a woman, and they were having a child together, and the girls absolutely did not want to go. Sarah decided that she was going to stay behind in Wichita and be closer to her dad. But Emily was told that the move was happening because of her, so she didn't really have a choice not to go. He told her they were moving to be closer to Vanderbilt, which is where she wanted to go to school. And one thing to know about Emily is she was a people pleaser. In school, she was a teacher's pet. She never wanted to rock the boat, just did everything that anybody said because she didn't want to let anybody down. That personality for somebody like Lou is very easy to prey upon, and that's what he did. Sarah, for the first time since leaving Angel's Landing, had this weight lifted off of her. She was 24 and felt free to go out and live her life. She was hanging out with her friends, going to the bars, and it's while she's out one night that she meets a boy. It's literally one of those storybook moments where she sees him and she asks her friend, who's that guy? Same goes for him. He sees her to his friend. He says, who's that girl? That whole night they just talked and danced together. At the end of the night, they exchanged phone numbers and pretty much just started dating. And he was everything that she needed after what she went through. He was an amazing sense of comfort and protection. One of the main reasons is because he was an expert marksman in the National Guard, and he also served in Iraq and Afghanistan, which was a big wake-up call to Lou because he was still keeping in touch with Sarah. And so one afternoon, he called Sarah, and for some reason, he was just up in arms, and he's screaming at her on the other line, and her boyfriend can hear him. So he grabs the phone and he says, what's going on? You can't talk to her like this. Sarah's a little bit nervous because she's beside him saying, that's Lou. You can't talk to him like that. You can't hang up. And he just says, don't ever call this number. And he hangs up on Lou. Instantly, he could just tell from her fear and mannerisms, something had gone on with this man that she was so fearful for. He flat out asks her, did he ever do anything to you? And she just broke down. She said that at this point, she hadn't really connected, that she had been abused all those years until the question was asked like that, and it just clicked. I think that's very relatable for younger abuse victims. All those years you can reflect back and know that it's not normal, but if it's the only thing that you know, how do you know? She shared pretty much everything that she experienced at Angel's Landing with her boyfriend. And something else came out in the conversation that gave him pause. She said that since he had been living in Tennessee, he had changed his name and wanted her to refer to him as Joe Venegas if she was talking about him to other people. So he waits until she falls asleep, and he gets online and he goes to the FBI website and he finds a contact email for them to send an email. I didn't even know you could send an email to the FBI, but you can. So he emails and says, there is some messed up cult-like going on at this place called Angel's Landing. And it was one of those moments where it just landed on the right desk at the right time, because this FBI agent was friends with the detective who had been looking into Lou all of these years. So he calls the detective and says, hey, we just got this really disturbing email. It's about Lou Castro, but now he's going by a different name. So he gives the detective this Joe Venegas name. He goes and looks it up, and he sees that all of Lou's accounts had been transferred into this Joe guy's accounts in Tennessee. So he calls the bank that all the money was transferred to, and he says, is there by chance any surveillance photo of this Joe guy opening up this account? And sure enough, there was. And when they fax it over, he sees the photo and he sees that it's Lou Castro. It had almost been 2 years since Jennifer's death, and this detective knows that he's got a pattern. It takes him about 2 years to go through that money, and then after that, somebody else has to die. So he knows that he's got not a lot of time at all. So he just sees that he's committed bank fraud. So on April 21st, 2010, he goes and gets an arrest warrant and arrests Lou as he's walking out of his house to start his day one morning. Once he's arrested, they take his fingerprints and they're able to learn even more. Not only was he not Joe Venegas or Lou Castro, but he was a guy named Daniel Perez who had quite the extensive criminal record, including 2 sex crimes that he pleaded no contest to in the 90s. They were able to charge him with identity theft and bank fraud, but that was only a 2-year sentence. So during that time, they said, okay, we've got to come up with a case. We have to finally try to link him to these deaths, because if he gets out in 2 years, he's not going to pay for what they were quite sure he was responsible for. They reach out to Sarah and they ask if she's willing to share her experience in what happened at Angel's Landing. And I feel like it's really important to share that Sarah speaks so highly of Ron Goodwin, who is the detective that was on this case. And she said it's because of how kind and respectful and patient he was with her that she was able to open up to him. For 4 hours, she shares everything that she knew and her personal experience with what happened with Lou. I can't even imagine how hard that was, even for the detective to take in, but he gets her statement, and then he knows he also has to talk to Emily to even build a stronger case. Emily is the one who was at home when Patricia died and the one who tried to save her and called 911. And since it was her story that she saw Patricia slip and hit her head and fall into the pool, there was no reason to say that it was anything other than an accident. But she also felt this bond with Ron. He was very kind, gentle, patient, and her interview changed everything. She said a week prior to Trisha's death, Trish and Lou came up to Emily and said something was going to happen to Trish and she needed to be the alibi. She said she was crying and she didn't want anything to happen to Trish. She didn't want to be without her, and Trish just kept saying, it's going to be okay. She said the day of, after lunch, Sarah headed off to the dealership and Lou said he'd be right behind her. And then he went up to Emily and said, it's time. You need to go and wait in the pool house. She said she grabbed Trisha's daughter and she headed to the pool house. She was crying, and on her way, she saw Trish standing on the diving board, and she just went up and hugged her. She was crying, and Trish said, why are you crying? And she said, because I don't want to be without you. Trish reassured her everything was going to be okay, and Emily and Patricia's daughter went to the pool house. She said while she was there, she heard a splash and then heard a scream, and then it was just silence. Lou went and got Emily, and he said, you need to wait 20 minutes in here. Then you and the baby need to go to the pool. You need to jump in to make it look like you jumped in to save her, and then call 911. She did exactly as she was told, and Lou was able to drive to the dealership to have an alibi. On top of this, she also shared that she also experienced the same abuse that Sarah did. When it came to Emily, though, he didn't tell her that there was anything wrong with her necessarily and that he had to fix her. He said that these powers that he had, they would get weaker. And the only way that they could stay strong and he could serve everybody and help the world was if he was intimate with a pure child. So she was the only way that he could keep his powers. You guys, Jurassic Jail is too good of a place for this guy. With Emily's story, with what happened to Trish, finally now they have what they need to charge him with murder. He was charged while he was still in jail on his fraud charges. And at trial, another 3 women who had no connection to one another or the girls came forward saying he said similar stories to them in terms of fixing them or needing to be with them to recharge his powers. If I was there, I would have jumped over and just... This guy even tried to take the stand in his own defense, like he was going to be able to manipulate the jury, and just denies everything. Basically calls everybody a liar. He said the only thing that he was guilty of was moving money for drug dealers, and that's how he got his money, because he got paid to do that, which is interesting because I've seen this before. It's like when somebody's done something really, really bad, they try to confess to something that's kind of bad, but not as bad as what they actually did, being like, okay, well, no, I didn't do that, but I did this. You got me, I'll take this lighter sentence. Don't look over here anymore. Thankfully, the jury didn't buy any of it though, and in February 2015, Daniel Perez was sentenced to 80 years in prison. Unfortunately, Mona and her daughter Lindsay, Brian and Jennifer, all of their deaths are still ruled accidental. I guess the fact that he's not able to get out and hurt anybody else is some form of justice, but it'd be nice to see him pay for that. Monster just doesn't even cut it with this guy. The way he was able to get in people's heads, I truly believe was the one that convinced Jennifer and Brian to take their lives, and to convince people to allow him to abuse them and lie for them, kill for them, all in the name of doing an angel's work. It's sickening. I struggle with the words, you guys. Basically, I would love for him to just burn in the fiery pits of hell for all of eternity and longer. If you haven't seen this episode on this case on Dateline, I highly recommend you do, even if it is just to see Dennis Murphy rip him apart in his interview. He actually speaks to this piece of human garbage. It's one of my favorite interviews ever. Also, shout out to the detectives that wouldn't give up on locking up this piece of poop. And all the credit goes to these 2 women who made this all happen. Sarah is now married to the man who helped put this monster away as well. And Emily is a paralegal who wants to become a lawyer to put more monsters behind bars. All right, that is it for me today, you guys. That was heavy. If you haven't already, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It means the world to me. I love and I appreciate you so much. The answer to today's riddle: name 3 consecutive days without naming any of the 7 days of the week. And the answer is yesterday, today, and tomorrow. It's so cute and very obvious, but wasn't obvious to me. All right, I'll see you in the next video. I will miss you terribly. Until then, make sure to love each other, love yourself, and I will see you soon.